Just last weekend was Australia's biggest ever Middle-earth strategy battle game tournament. It came in with a total of 81 players in the end. And in this video, we're going to have a look at what armies are the absolute strongest in Australia. This tournament was called Clash of the Titans, and the winner of the tournament has gotten a ticket to the Articon Invitational Masters, meaning that they'll be representing Australia against the other greatest players from all around the world. This tournament was held in Sydney, and there was a large group of us Victorians who travelled up. In fact, there were 5 of the 8 players from the Conquest Champions League who went to this tournament. The Conquest Champions League is tournament veterans, so let's see how they all placed and break down the top 10 army lists from the Clash of the Titans. Clash of the Titans is 600 points, and there was 5 rounds. Starting in 10th place, we have Jack Ryan playing Theodreds Guard. His army has Theodred, Grimbold, and Elfhelm, so taking the 3 named characters from it, as well as an assortment of Warriors of Rohan, Royal Guard, Helmingus, which are Warriors of Rohan upgraded to have +1 strength, and a couple guys riding around on horse. Now, this is much more of a combined arms build of Rohan. He's got only a couple cavalry in here. Usually Rohan is played as mostly cavalry, but this Legendary Legion makes sense to have a lot of guys on foot. The Helmingas have their +1 strength. All of the throwing spears count as regular spears as well, so gives it a lot of motivation to play on foot. The main special rule of the Legendary Legion is that while Theodred is alive, everyone has auto-pass courage test, which is really, really powerful. However, Theodred must charge if possible, so it is kind of difficult to keep him alive. Overall, I really, really like this list, and it's very themey, and I think there's probably a lot of people who discount it as not being as powerful as some of the other lists, but Jack Ryan has definitely proved them wrong. Theodred's Guard is great. Now, we will actually see another Theodred's Guard, but it's going to be built quite differently to this one. Alright, let's go into 9th place, and that is the Conquest Champions and the Last Alliance of Noobs and Men very own Sean Rosado. He was playing Minas Tirith, and I was very vocal with him. Sean and I made the 10-hour drive to Sydney together, that of all the players in the tournament, his army was the one I wanted to play against the least. Personally, I think that this is pretty filthy, and I absolutely laid into him, and he did pretty well with it. He came away with 4 wins and 1 loss. He was on the top table in the final game, playing it out for first place, which he did lose. Alright, let's have a look at what this list actually is. It's Denethor, Ingold, Kyrian, an Avenger Bolt Thrower, another Avenger Bolt Thrower, and a Battlecry Trebuchet. So he's got 3 siege weapons in there. Now, importantly, there's no banner in this army, but he's still coming in with 41 models. He's got 3 decently cheap heroes, well, especially cheap in Denethor's case. Denethor's only 35 points, and he's leading 15 models, which is insane value if you're trying to hoard out, which Sean obviously was here. He's got 9 bows, all of which are strength 3 because they're Minas Tirith longbows held by the Citadel Guard. So this is an absolutely terrifying army, and I think its hitting power in the shooting phase literally could not be higher. The list is also still really high on numbers with 42 models. The reason that it's able to squeeze so much hitting power in the shooting phase and so many models in is because there are no big heroes at all. The biggest one being Ingold, who I think is only 60 points. So Sean really knew what he was doing here with this army list. He knew that if he comes up against those big heroes, as long as he can just shoot them, he doesn't actually need to fight them. Now, this one is really tough to go against, especially depending on the scenario, because the shooting power is just so good. Personally, I wouldn't recommend playing a list like this because your opponent might hate you, but that's alright. Sean knew what he was doing with it. He knew what he was setting out to do, and 9th place is a very, very solid finish with it. In 8th place, we have Andrew Lemaire playing the Defenders of Helm's Deep. He's got Theoden, Legolas, and a Captain of Rohan. In those warbands, he's just got Warriors and Royal Guard with a lot of throwing spears. Legolas has 10 Galadrim Warriors with Elf Bows and Spears, and the Captain just has more Warriors and Royal Guard with more throwing spears. So this is a very, very shooting-heavy army again. It's got 11 Elf Bows with Legolas holding one of them, and he gets 3 shots, and a ton of throwing spears. Every single infantry model has a throwing spear. The important thing here is that those Elf Warriors are also carrying spears, so there's just spears on spears on spears in this army, because in the Legendary Legion, the throwing spears count as regular spears as well. Having all throwing spears is obviously really, really powerful because he can kite his opponents and just throw into them, doing a lot of damage. When a regular warrior of Rohan wins a fight, he can make a single strength 3 hit against his opponent. However, if he's fighting, there's a chance that his opponent wins that fight and kills him. But when he has a throwing spear, if he just throws that spear, he hits on a 4 if he didn't move, or a 5 if he did move, and does a strength 3 hit. So it's just as effective for that warrior of Rohan to win the fight or to throw a spear, which goes to show how good throwing spears are. Having spears on all the elves makes a lot of sense because it means that they can spread their fight 5 around, making sure you're always out fighting your opponent. The interesting inclusion here that I reckon I disagree with is the Captain of Rohan. Now, I know that it's another infantry model with the throwing spear, but personally, I would have gone with Gambling. He doesn't necessarily have to have the banner, but I definitely would give Gambling the banner. So I would drop the Warrior of Rohan, who has a banner, upgrade the Captain to be Gambling, and give him a banner. And then I'd have to drop a few more models to fit it in. I like Gambling more than a Captain because he has 3 might instead of just 2, and that banner, of course, can generate 1 per turn. That's how I would build this list. Obviously, it's different to how Andrew did it, and whatever Andrew did worked particularly well for him. This is a masterclass in a kiting and shooting list. So if you want to find out how good throwing weapons are, this is a great list to test it out with. And in 7th place, we have Geordie playing Erebor Reclaimed. Now, Geordie's not playing in this season of the Conquest Champions, but we have seen him a ton here on the channel. So it's great to have another Victorian up here in the top 10. Geordie has Dane Ironfoot, Gloin, and an Iron Hill Captain on Goat. It's a pretty stock standard Erebor Reclaim list, and it did really, really well. Important things to note here is that there isn't a banner in the army list, but that's because Dane, in this version where he's the king under the mountain, so this isn't Dane on Pig, this is Dane as an old man, the one that came out in Defense of the North, he counts as a 6-inch banner, so Geordie could save points there. Now obviously there's some scenarios that you get victory points for having a banner, and look, that's nice to have, but Geordie obviously didn't need it. Now, importantly, he has a lot of crossbows in this army, which is very powerful because that strength 4 shooting, especially when you have defense 7 or defense 8 in front of it, means that you're going to outshoot almost everything. Even if your shooting hitting power isn't as strong, your defensive capability is so much higher that you'll outshoot other armies that have a lot more shooting than you just because your defense is so high. Gloin was a good pick in here. He's one of the champions of Erebor that is just so efficient for his cost. He's got 3 attacks and Burly, which you can just never go wrong with. And the Iron Hills Captain on Wargoat is one of the best captains in the game. He's got a 5-up Master of Battle, which is just brutally effective, and when he charges it on that Wargoat, he can knock his opponent prone. While this army is relatively low model count, it's good at everything that it does. Our next one is 6th place, which goes to Tyler, playing the Assault on Lothlorien, and he is also in the Conquest Champions League. Tyler's got Merzger, an Orc Captain, Druzag, and a Moria Goblin Shaman. He's got a lot of Orc Warriors with Spear. He's got a Warg Rider and a Warg. He's got a bunch of Goblins with several bows and a couple Prowlers. And then he's got 2 Bat Swarms, some Giant Spiders, and just a couple more Goblins. So this is a relatively standard Assault on Lothlorien list. The big thing here is that we're missing Ashrak, which is sad because I think it's always awesome to take all 3 of the Shamans when we're playing Assault on Lothlorien. This army comes in with 40 models and 12 bows. But remember, those bows get +1 to wound. However, the range of shooting is limited to 12 inches. The Goblins do ignore this, so they can still shoot at 18 inches, making this another really strong shooting army, which I think is a trend that we're seeing in the top 10 here. Shooting is obviously very important to these top 10 players. Assault on Lothlorien just covers so many bases with how hard it can hit. It's interesting that he's gone with a lot of spears on his Orc Warriors instead of shields or two-handed weapons. I understand having spears, but having +1 defense from that shield and the ability to shield is really, really solid. That's a change that I would have made, but obviously this worked out for Tyler, and I think trying to maximize his models and maximize his attacks in combat really makes a lot of sense. Especially because he's got that Moria Goblin Shaman. The Moria Goblins are going to be able to charge terrifying things with no problems because of their fury. However, the Orcs will still be Courage 2, so maybe that was his idea there. He'll charge them with the Goblins, and then the Orcs can just back them up. I've spoken several times on this channel about how good I think Bat Swarms are. I'll say it again, I think they're the best troop in the game, and taking 2 of them makes a lot of sense here. They halve the fight of any enemy that they're attacking, rounding down, and they can fly, which is just so helpful for getting objectives in the late game or just sneaking over the opponent's line to get a trap. Assault on Lothlorien has been very popular at top tournaments, so I'm not surprised to see it doing really well here in Australia. In 5th place we had PJ, and I was fortunate enough to play against PJ in the final round. PJ's got a very easy list to read off. It's Bjorn, Grim and 10 Bjornings, rounding out exactly 600 points. He's got 2 great bows on those Bjornings, which are just a strength 4 bow. Now there's not too much to say about his list composition, but oh man, are the Bjornings powerful. This is a super low model count army, only coming in with 12 models and just 2 bows. So it's kind of an outlier when you look at the rest of the lists, which are, middle to high numbers with plenty of shooting. I do think the inclusion of the 2 bows is really important, because with Bjornings, your opponent might be tempted just to run away from you forever because those bears are so scary. But with those 2 bows, if they're running away, you can still do a little bit of damage to them, which is really helpful. Bjorn and Grimbjorn are almost unkillable and can go up against almost any opponent and be confident that they'll win. PJ played these guys really well, making sure to use their transforms and their brutal power attacks to get the most out of the bears. Bjornings has been very popular at the top tables here in Australia, and I'm sure around the world, because they are an incredibly powerful legion. They did receive a nerf a few months ago, however I think that just brought them down to still being very powerful instead of very powerful. In 4th place, we have Riley Ward playing Angmar. Now this is a very interesting Angmar build. He's got the Witch King and Gullivar, and almost pure Warg Riders, except for a couple Spectres. Now I do believe that this list was first forged by Andrew Coleman several years ago, where he played it at Clash or maybe Masters a few years ago, and showed it off to the world. Now I think this is a really strong list. The Witch King and Gullivar, go without saying, are one of the best assassination combos in the game. Witch King is one of the best casters, and Gullivar is one of the hardest hitters. And then the Horde of Warg Riders is really strong. They've all got throwing spears. The list overall is terrible on courage. Gullivar starts at courage 4 and can't go above that because his courage is the same as whatever his wounds is, so if he gets wounded, his courage is decreasing, which is really bad for him. All those Warg Riders are courage 2. Of course, the Spectres and the Witch King are higher courage, but the bulk of the army is struggling with that. Now let's talk about why this list is so powerful. Firstly, Gullivar hits like an absolute freight train. He's fight 7, he's got 4 attacks to start out with, strength 7, and monstrous charge with fly. Just about every single thing in the game, if it loses a fight to a charging Gullivar, will die. Almost every single thing. But that's okay, because you can generally screen off flying monsters. That's where the Spectres and the Witch King come in. The Spectres can move models out of the way to expose enemy heroes. You might have thought that your hero was safe because his troops were surrounding him, but these Spectres have just moved them, so now your hero's all out in the open. You compare that with the Witch King, who can probably do a compel against your hero to draw him out further, or just do a transfix so you don't have the opportunity to call a heroic strike against Gullivar. It's a really powerful combo, and all of those Warg Riders cause terror if they're within 3 inches of the Witch King or Gullivar, so you're really going to struggle to charge into them as well. The Spectres do get the Courage 6, which means that they can sit back on objectives for the late game. Now Riley's Witch King only has 3 Might, 12 Will, and 2 Fate, so relatively budget on that regard. Only 12 Will. Usually we see Witch Kings at around 15, and I understand he needed to keep his model count up because this is only 21 models, which is super low. Gullivar is such a liability as well. He's only defense 5, so strength 3 shooting wounds him on 5s, and as he gets shot, he loses his attacks, which means he can die really quickly, so you've got to be super careful to play this army well. So that's places 10 through 6. Before we get into the top 3, let's do some honorable mentions, and funnily enough, the first honorable mention is going to be me. I came 14th place at this tournament. I had 3 wins and 2 losses, but I had large wins and small losses, and there were soft score points in this tournament, so you got a few extra points if you converted a model, had a display board, and a couple other things, and I had just about all of them, so I think that put me at the top of the people who had 3 wins and 2 losses, and maybe even above some of the people who were on 4 wins, 1 loss, but had small wins. Usually I like to run my tournaments on just wins and losses and nothing else, but that's how this one was run. And in my army of Gothmog, I've got Gothmog on Warg with a shield, Guritz, Zagdush, a Taskmaster, a horde of Mirannins, and some Orcs with bow and spear. So, My total model count is 35. I've only got 4 bows, but I'm starting with 10 might. 10 might is already pretty good for 600 points, but Gothmog has Master of Battle, which means if anyone calls a heroic action within 6 inches of him, he can copy it. I've also got the Taskmaster, which means that every time any hero within 6 inches of my Taskmaster calls a heroic move, march, or shoot on a 4-up, it's free and I don't need to spend might on it. So this army is all about resource management. Well, not really management, it's all about just having way more resources than my opponent. The 35 models is also decently above average for 600 points, and these guys hit pretty hard. I've got strength 4 pretty much across the board with a couple strength 5 characters in there, and everything's pretty much at defense 6, so it can die pretty slowly as well. I've got Hatred Men within 12 inches of Gothmog, which is +1 wound against men, which was pretty helpful because as you can see in the top 10, there's been quite a few armies of men. So that's everything from Rohan, Minas Tirith to Easterlings, Army of Lake Town, all sorts of army lists. So whenever I came up against them, I was pretty happy. Zagdush was my favorite character for sure because he comes in with 3 attacks and he can go to strength 5 if he needs to. He's just so cheap for what he provides to the army. Guritz was great, especially when we were up in Maelstrom because he gives me ±1 to any roll that I do in Maelstrom, which was super helpful and a really big deal in my Maelstrom game. My 3 wins were against an Angmar army that I was really happy I could win against because they caused terror and I thought they sort of hard countered me, but I was able to pull out the win there. I then lost in round 2, unfortunately, to a Theodred allied in with Galadrim in Storm the Camp, where they just outmaneuvered me and had some really good shooting that took a ton of my might off the table. In the 3rd game, I was against Azog's Legion, and it was a relatively small army with low model count, so I just charged everything into the troops and managed to break it super quickly. My 4th game was a really tough one. I came up against the Survivors of Lake Town with Bard and the Daughters, with Thranduil and some Palace Guard. They all caused terror, which was a big problem for me, but again, I managed to win this one in domination. And finally, I played against PJ, who we just talked about, in 5th place playing his Bjornings. If you want to listen to a full breakdown of all of my games, as well as a couple of the other guys' games, we're going to be doing a podcast episode that's going to be a Patreon exclusive, so consider signing up to that if you want to hear more details about how the tournament went. The other army that I want to give an honorable mention to is played by Nathan. Nathan is in the Conquest Champions League again, and he came 13th place, but he was playing the Breaking of the Fellowship. 8 models, just the Fellowship without Gandalf in the Legendary Legion, and he came 13th place, coming in with 4 wins and 1 loss. I was absolutely amazed with this. When he said he was bringing the Breaking of the Fellowship, I was like, oh yeah, good luck, having fun, super themey but pretty weak. And wow, did he prove me wrong. 13th place with that army is absolutely incredible, and I gotta say, that's gotta be one of its best performances ever to be 13th out of 81 players. So massive props to Nathan. That's huge. And next week, we're going to see him versus PJ in the Conquest Champions League. So make sure you stay tuned for that and subscribe so you don't miss out. All right, let's get into our podium. In 3rd place, we've got Matt Todd from the Green Dragon, a legend of the community. And he has a very standard Iron Hills army. He's got Dane on boar, an Iron Hills captain on goat, and just a bunch of dwarves with as many crossbows as he could take. In this list, both Dane and the Iron Hills captain get Master of Battle, but they have to roll for it, so it's not quite as good as my Gothmog. He's coming in with 23 models, which is pretty low. Usually at 600 points, we're expecting about 30 to be average, so he's well below that. The 9 crossbows, similar to what I said for Geordie's, this just shoots really well. With shooting, it doesn't matter how many shots you have, it just matters how many guys you can kill. He can kill a lot more than his opponent because his defense is so high and his strength on those shooting is so high. So even if his opponent has 20 bows but they only kill 1 model per turn and these crossbows kill 3 models per turn, well, he's coming out on top. Matt is a super experienced player and it's no surprise to see him doing well at tournaments, especially as he's also preparing to head over to Articon later this year to play in the World Championships. That takes us into 2nd place, which went to Michael Kerr. Michael Kerr had Theodreds Guard again. I told you we'd be seeing it again. He's got Theodred, Elfhelm, and a Captain of Rohan, and a lot more guys on horse. The big difference is that there's no Grimbold, and I'm really sad about that because Grimbold is absolutely awesome. I think the reason he left him at home is because he wanted all of his heroes on horse, because heroes on horse hit really hard and are obviously a lot more maneuverable. Again, this is a really shooting heavy army. He's only got 5 bows, but a ton of throwing spears. So everything that I said about the previous Theodreds Guard army with the throwing spears applies here as well. And that's 3 Rohan armies in the top 10, which is pretty impressive because I really don't think that Theodred's Guard is the strongest army on paper. I think it's really down to a good pilot. And if you can kill Theodred early, you can really exploit its weaknesses. So very well played to Michael Kerr. This was also the army that I voted for best painted because it was absolutely incredible. A really subtle paint job that from a distance didn't look too impressive, but as soon as you got up close, it looked really beautiful with some subtle damage on all of those shields. We've been waiting for it. Let's get into first place. And there's one member of the Conquest Champions League who we haven't seen here yet, and that goes to Alex Colasante. He's playing his Serpent Horde, and a huge congratulations to Alex. It is absolutely incredible that he won this tournament, and he's playing in the Conquest Champions League where he did win in Game 1 against Sean, so awesome to see him pulling out a win with the same Serpent Horde army. Let's have a look at his army and talk about why it's so good. He's got Soledad the Serpent Lord on horse, the Betrayer on horse, and Raza, the Fang of the Serpent. And then he's got an absolute horde of Herodrim warriors with bows, a couple Serpent Guard, a couple Watchers of Kana, and a couple Serpent Riders. Comes in with 38 models total and 16 bows. Now he's able to go above 1/3 bows because of the Herodrim army bonus. His hitting power is absolutely through the roof because the Betrayer allows him to re-roll all failed wounds within 6 inches of the Betrayer, which in general will be just about everyone. His maneuverability is solid. He's got a heroic march and he's got a couple cavalry as well as heroes on horse so that he can get around the board quickly. His numbers are fantastic with 38 models at 600 points. His magic is, look, it's good because he has magic, but the Betrayer is not great at casting magic, but when he's desperate, he can pull out a transfix. So the magic is solid. His might is pretty decent. 8 points might at 600 points isn't the highest, but it's definitely not the lowest. It's about where you want it to be. His courage isn't fantastic, but he has a ton of spears and a couple of Watchers of Kana to go into some terrifying things if he needs to, but his shooting is a natural courage defense because if the enemy doesn't want to charge him with his terrifying stuff, Alex can just stay still and shoot them all, so they've got to charge into him. Overall, a fantastic list, and Alex has played a ton of games with it. He's using almost the exact same list for the Conquest Champions League, and Alex and I filmed a practice match before we went off to Masters where we played my army of Gothmog against his Serpent Horde. Again, a massive congratulations to Alex. I'm going to get him in a podcast with me where we break down all of our games that we played at Clash. Because Alex won this tournament, he is invited to the Articon Invitational Masters, and he was planning on heading over to Articon anyway, so it's perfect that he can now play in the Invitational as well as the Open. So, good luck to Australia. Thank you for watching. These have been the top 10 army lists from the Clash of the Titans, and until next time, this has been Conquest Creations.